Right, well, this winsome creature here is a British political commentator called Owen Jones. If you're in America and you've not come across Owen Jones before, he's sort of like a Cenk Uygur, except not quite so butch. Not quite so butch at all. And of course, after October the 7th, he, along with other reporters, was shown the video of some of the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated in southern Israel, and came out of there and made a video saying, well, he saw some things that looked like they might have been the beginnings of an attack, but then he didn't see the attack, so he didn't really believe it happened. That's Owen Jones, and I don't know what he's going to... Well, okay, I have not seen his video here that he made about the Hezbollah fiasco, but I can guess what he's going to say. So to say I'm totally unprepared for him, that would be a lie. I suppose in my mind I've already framed some answers, but you never know, he may give me a surprise. So let's just take a look. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds.
If, say, Hamas or Hezbollah managed to simultaneously detonate the pagers or mobile phones of Israeli reservists, whether or not they were on duty or not, wherever they happen to be, whoever happened to be around them, that would...
Chance would be a fine thing.
...be rightly classified as an obscene act of mass terrorism. It would...
No. It would probably get a lot of clapping and cheering from the Arab world. And you, Owen Jones, would be pretending not to clap and cheer at the same time. But the fact is, an act of terrorism is when you go for civilians. Now, that is the very definition of Hezbollah, who have been shelling northern Israel for the past 10 months, 11 months. They have dropped shells in such quantities. I think they said like 10,000 shells in as many months. And the whole area has become uninhabitable. The last victim that I heard about was a schoolyard with, it was full of children. 10 of them were killed by an indiscriminate bit of shelling from Hezbollah into the schoolyard where some kids were playing football. That's terrorism. I don't remember hearing Owen Jones fulminating about that. But let's continue.
Also, rightly be judged to be a grave war crime.
It should be a war crime, what Hezbollah's done.
Also note that anyone who cheered on such an attack in the West would be liable for arrest under their country.
No. Now he's made a whole story. This is along the lines of, if your grandmother had wheels, would she be a wheelbarrow? It's ridiculous. He's saying if somebody cheered on this, then they'd be liable for arrest. Well, let's face it, the act of terrorism that Hamas did on October the 7th has been cheered on by hundreds of thousands of Muslims and their sock puppets. And none of those people has been arrested. So I don't know. He can't possibly believe what he's just saying there.
She's anti-terror legislation. Now, today across Lebanon and reportedly in Syria, pagers suddenly exploded with reports that more than 4,000 people so far have been injured, with at least 11 killed, including one 8-year-old girl named...
Now, as much as those pagers have been exploded, so have Lebanese citizens cheered and held parties. along with the Muslims in other lands, because they hate Hezbollah. Hezbollah went into Lebanon. It's an army of invasion. It has taken up a huge chunk of southern Lebanon and is using that as a platform from which to endanger the Lebanese by bombing Israel. They are a terrorist organisation and deserve absolutely everything that they have got.
Fatima Jaffa.
Oh, and this is the 8-year-old child, apparently, who has been killed. She was standing very close to her father at the time, the story goes. I want you to, the first thing that I just thought of when I saw that is that this kid is 8 years old and look how she's dressed. And Owen Jones, unless I bet you he doesn't remark on that. I will lay a wager on that. That's perfectly normal as far as he's concerned. An 8-year-old child imprisoned like that in a cocoon that restricts everything she does and probably overheats her as well. He hasn't mentioned that yet, and I shouldn't think he will mention it from now on. She died, poor kid, because she was too close to her father at the time. That's sad. I'll tell you what else is sad. The fact that she's dressed like that. And so are all the other little girls that Hezbollah have managed to father up till now. Just look at that poor kid trying to make her way round the world dressed like that.
Abdullah. The reported targets was Hezbollah, which
and they were all Hezbollah.
Is two things: a Lebanese militia and a political party, which is part of the governing coalition in Lebanon. But it's not just...
They aren't a political party. Well, they have a political wing in order to take over Lebanon. Lebanon, which was a mostly Christian country, which made the mistake of giving sanctuary to Palestinian... they weren't refugees by that time. They were a terror brigade that got thrown out of Jordan because they were trying to overturn the Jordanian government. And that weakened them. And then Iran brought its militia in and parked its militia in the south of the country. And now they're doing all sorts, running the country. There was a huge explosion in the port not too long ago. An enormous explosion destroyed miles of property around it because they'd been storing explosives in a warehouse in the port. Okay, that's Hezbollah. And he's talking about them as a political party.
Hezbollah fighters who use these pages, reportedly so do medics. I mean, we need more information on that. That's what the questions will be asking. Who actually has these pages, and does Israel know? Yeah.
You see, so now he's speculating on who else has the pages. We know that the pages were specific to Hezbollah. And then he says medics have pages. Yes, they do, but they wouldn't have been on the Hezbollah network unless, of course, they were Hezbollah medics.
Can there be?
But he's letting himself out. So again, he's constructing a universe that doesn't exist and then arguing from there.
Sure, who these pages belong to. We'll talk about that. But one widely circulating claim is that Israel intercepted a shipment of pages and then put explosives in them, remotely detonating them. Hezbollah uses these pages or relies on them rather than mobile phones to prevent Israel monitoring their activities.
Now, did you hear that? Hezbollah stopped using mobile phones to prevent Israelis from monitoring their activities. It sounds like the Israelis are just sort of nosy parkers who just happened to be listening in on Hezbollah. not trying to defend themselves from Hezbollah attacks. No. In fact, he could have said the Israelis could have been listening in to mobile phones to prepare themselves for Hezbollah shellings. No, he didn't say to defend themselves. No, to prevent the Israelis from listening in or whatever it was.
The other possibility I've seen, obviously, being discussed is some sort of cyber attack to remotely blow up these pages using their batteries. I'm not a tech expert here, but it strikes me as extremely implausible, especially given these pages appear to be primitive. If that were true, well, the implications of that would be even more terrifying, though they are terrifying enough, as we'll discuss. Now, apologists for Israel are in a frenzy of ecstasy over this. One example is Avi Meyer. He used to be the editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Post. He says, note there are exactly 0 reports of anyone but Hezbollah personnel being wounded by the exploding pages. Whoever carried out this ingenious attack did so in a manner that specifically targeted the Hezbollah men and spared uninvolved civilians. Let's remember that. Now, Avi Meyer.
Well, that indeed happens to be the case with 1 or 2 tragic, I think there's been 2 tragic exceptions to that.
Has a history of denial when it comes to the killing of children. He was the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post when they posted false, disgusting claims that Palestinian parents were faking the deaths, the murders, the killing of their babies by Israeli weapons by using dolls. That's who.
Well, I don't know about that story. If I'd have done, seen this before, I could have maybe done some research. But we do know that the various groups of Palestinian have been faking things for a long time. I don't know about this doll stuff, but I do know that there are many amusing videos online in which you can see a group of Palestinians with some horribly wounded comrade, and they're running along with the stretcher, and then they stop, and then the horribly wounded person gets off the stretcher, or sometimes they trip up and tip the horribly wounded person out, and he just gets up and walks away. They're not averse to that sort of thing. It's called Pallywood, isn't it? So I've seen a lot of those. Some of them are very funny. Of course, the situation itself is not funny.
This guy is. He's walked back this claim now. We have the confirmation, obviously, of at least 1 child being killed.
Yeah, at least 1 child. 4,000 Hamas terrorists wounded and 1 child accidentally caught in the crossfire or whatever.
But this underlines that this claim, it's a highly targeted attack on a terrorist group, is a nonsense.
It isn't nonsense. It is a highly targeted attack on a terrorist group. What else could you call Hezbollah?
See the consequences. Indeed, I've watched the CTV footage of 2 attacks. I won't share them because otherwise YouTube will age restrict this video. One shows someone paying at a supermarket, paying for their goods, then they're paying.
I saw that one on the supermarket, and the only person who was injured was the man who was wearing the pager.
It explodes, clearly injuring people around them. And
he didn't injure anyone around him. They were all running around wondering what had happened.
In a market, you can see the same again. I can't show you the video, though, the consequences, because otherwise
I haven't seen that one.
Otherwise, YouTube will age restrict this video and then limit the number of people who can watch it. But I can show you this video of the consequences of a pager explosion in someone's home.
الو
صار انفجار البيجر
وين الشيخ؟ لك الشيخ معه بيجر جديدة؟ الشيخ معه بيجر جديدة ولا قديمة؟
Owen Jones saw the video of what had happened to the homes of Israelis on October the 7th, and he sat there in front of the camera and said, there's a bit of a mess basically, but all I saw didn't show me any proof that any violence had been done to the people. That's what he said. But this Yeah, this is terrible here when a pager goes up and makes a mess in a bedroom.
Well, you can see there that caused significant damage. You can
Oh, yes, for sure.
see how if this exploded on a person, it could cause serious injuries and deaths.
But yes, that was the intention, that it would cause serious injuries. And it did. And they were all terrorists belonging to a terrorist organisation and using these devices which were exclusive to a terrorist network.
Other people, in particularly if the reports are true that the attack happened after they received a message, so many would have taken the page out first. Now, you just have to ask yourself some basic questions about this attack, or rather series of attacks, and that's actually important. This is a series of attacks. By what definition are these targeted legitimate military attacks? We know
They are targeted legitimate attacks to members of a terrorist organisation. And remember, they're not just bombing Israel, they are terrorising the Lebanese as well.
know that Israel has an all-encompassing definition, for example, of Hamas, where junior officials, civil servants, public administrators and so on are defined as Hamas and thus judged to be legitimate targets.
But they are Hamas. I mean, they are... There were Hamas members who were supposed to be teachers at UNRWA and turned out to be holding Israelis they were using as slaves in their houses. Teachers, doctors. Where do you draw the line? But anyway, the Israelis haven't blown up Hamas like they're blowing up Hezbollah, so I don't know why he's bringing Hamas into it.
And thus attacked, even if that kills their entire families. In this case, Hezbollah is a political party.
It's not a political party. It's a terrorist organisation imposed on Lebanon by Iran.
As well as a militia, which is part of the internationally recognised government in Lebanon.
It's not part of the internationally recognised government of Lebanon. It is an imposition into the government of Lebanon, and the Lebanese would be delighted if they weren't there. They have stolen Lebanon.
Do we know who exactly has these pages? What is the
Yes, we do. And you know it too, Owen Jones.
legality of the attempt to commit the mass extrajudicial killing of so many people with no regard for what they have or have not done?
They're all members of Hezbollah. In which case, they are all terrorists.
And how is it at all possible to take any precautions to protect other people? Well,
they are worn on the Hezbollah belts.
You can't, can you? Think of someone sitting on a crowded bus or train. Think of people driving cars or other vehicles.
Now, I saw a photograph of a young man on a motorbike, and he'd obviously been wearing a Hamas pager. And he was, I don't know how the state of his health, he was leaning against a car. He might have been dead, or he might have been just in shock. But he had a wound at his side where the pager had blown up. It was pretty contained, that wound. Now, it might have killed him, but it doesn't look like it would have killed anybody else.
Think of people in public spaces like a supermarket. Everyone with a pager turned into a walking explosive.
Yeah, well, I saw the supermarket one, and again, there were people close to him, and the only person on the ground after the thing had gone off was the man wearing the pager.
Becomes a threat to everyone around them. According to the Geneva Conventions, indiscriminate attacks are prohibited.
They weren't indiscriminate, though, were they?
Attacks are those which are not directed at a specific military objective, those which employ a method or means of combat which cannot be directed at a specific military
They were very much directed, though, weren't they?
objective.
And Hezbollah has been doing undirected shelling of northern Israel for 11 months.
Or those which employ a method or means of combat, the effects of which cannot be limited as required by this protocol.
Yeah, and that would include the 10 Israeli children who were killed by Hezbollah shells not too long ago.
Well, you cannot possibly argue that this meets the terms of the Geneva Conventions.
But it does.
Now, a few things here. We all know what would happen if Israel had been on the receiving end of such an attack or a series of attacks. If the phones or pages of Israeli reservists were attacked like this by Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran and exploded wherever those soldiers happened to be and killed and maimed children and bystanders...
Well, just a minute. But there, you see, now he's constructing another story. Out of 4,000 attacks, we have one record of one child being killed. It doesn't look like other people were maimed or killed at all. So all of this is nonsense that he's saying now. Just Hezbollah.
Those cheering on this attack would be denouncing this as a despicable, outrageous act.
Yeah, well, the fact is that chance would be a fine thing, wouldn't it?
Acts of terrorism. I would agree with them.
No, you wouldn't. You, Owen Jones, disagreed with people who said that what happened in October was a terrible thing.
If there was a similar attack on Israeli reservists as they went about their business in civilian...
Civilians, yes. We are talking about the Israelis attacking a terrorist group that is committed to the murder of every Jew in the Middle East, any Jew anywhere in the world that they can get hold of, actually. That's not quite the same thing, is it? Oh, yeah, because he's constructed this universe.
Areas, posing a grievous threat to those around them. I would condemn that as grievous terrorism.
No, you're a liar, Owen Jones. You wouldn't.
Some of us are morally consistent, you see. And this really does underline how terrorism is a term which is cynically redefined to mean violence used by the West's opponents. You see,
no.
When I put it out...
No. Terrorist attack is violence against civilians. That's what terrorism is. And Hamas and Hezbollah that is their constitution. The Hamas constitution starts with a vow to destroy Israel and all the Jews there. And Hezbollah has the same ambitions, although they don't have a constitution because they are a militia sent there by Iran. They are an invading army into Lebanon.
On social media, that this would be denounced as terrorism were, say, Hezbollah the perpetrators and Israel the target. Israel's apologists responded en masse to say, yeah, but that's because Hezbollah are terrorists. Well, if Hezbollah had committed such an attack, the method of the violence and the consequences of the violence would be portrayed as central evidence that Hezbollah are terrorists.
He's babbling now.
Terrorism is defined here by whether the violence is perpetrated by an opponent of the West.
No, by people who deliberately target civilians. And there are plenty of those. You don't hear of British people going into Cairo and blowing up civilians in markets there, or going loose with a knife, do you? But you do hear of Egyptians or Libyans or Algerians or whatever going into markets in Germany and running loose with a knife there. That's terrorism.
If it's committed by an opponent of the West, then it's terrorism. If it's done by Israel, then it's just a daring attack.
It's a daring attack. What they did was an ingenious attack on a bunch of terrorists.
You see, the hideous consequence of this can be seen. One doctor in Beirut reports, I smell too much blood today.
Hang on, I'm going to see if I can make this smaller. Now, this doctor or nurse, said that she smelled a lot of blood and tried to stop many slaughtered body parts from bleeding. And these are all Hezbollah terrorists she's talking about.
And tried to stop many slaughtered body parts from bleeding, which was pointless. What we are going through is unbelievable. A Lebanese Amnesty International campaigner, Bissan Fakir, reports my family and friends in Sur described surreal and shocking scenes. People running through the streets, women hitting their faces, mass confusion and hysteria, ambulance...
Right, just a minute. None of this is to do with Israel. People running through the streets, Women hitting their faces? What? Does Israel have some sort of mind control and is getting random women to hit their own faces? Mass confusion and hysteria, of course. But this isn't anything to do with Israel. Ambulances racing by will be trying to get the wounded to hospitals. That's to do with Israel. Rescue workers crying. Well, yeah. They were crying in Israel too when they found nurseries full of slaughtered babies.
This is racing by rescue workers crying. It's also worth noting here that the horrors the Israeli state has perpetrated against Lebanon go back decades.
Yeah, Israel has not attacked Lebanon except when the PLO or Hezbollah were attacking them from Lebanon.
Like during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon.
Bridget Gabriel talked about that. You don't have to believe me. You can go and talk to Bridget Gabriel, a Lebanese Christian who had to escape Lebanon because of what the PLO were doing to Christians there at the time.
And the Republican President Ronald Reagan was so disgusted at the horrors being perpetrated by the Israeli army that he rang the Israeli defense minister to announce what he called a Holocaust.
Now, it was not the Israeli army, as far as I remember. It was a Christian militia. So he's obfuscating here as well.
We're also currently in the midst of the anniversary of the days-long Sabra and Shatila massacre, when up to 3,500 Palestinian and Lebanese Shia civilians were massacred in Lebanon by Israel's allies.
Right. He's finally got to it. Israel's allies, the Christian militia. As far as I remember, what happened was that the Israelis were in there trying to contain attacks from the PLO at the time, and the Christian militia got into a camp and started killing people randomly. It was awful. It was a terrible thing. But I don't think the Israelis actually asked them to do it or even told them to do it. There's a lot of bad blood, literally, between the Christians and the Muslims at that point. The PLO were taking over the country, having been given sanctuary there after they'd had to do a runner from Jordan when they tried to overthrow the Jordanian government. The Palestinian so-called refugees have not acted very well in many cases, although I'm talking about their commanders. I'm sure there are lots of people who just had to go along because they were being dragged along by their ideological masters. Anyway, that's a matter for another discussion.
Which the Israeli defense minister was found culpable for by an Israeli commission. This makes me think of the Dahir Doctrine, developed by the Israeli state in 2006, which basically pushed for attacking civilian infrastructure.
Well, that appears to be, I don't know about that. But it seems like it's more likely the Israelis would attack buildings than women and children, in general. I'm not saying they never caught women and children in the crossfire, because I should think that's pretty well inevitable.
Targets, so civilians would turn against Hezbollah because of the price they were paying. That is terrorism.
It isn't terrorism. When somebody comes into your country and starts shooting up civilians, you are, as a government, are duty-bound to go and stop them from doing it.
Where you terrorise civilians for political objectives.
No, that's the Hamas technique, not the Israeli technique.
Now, I seriously believe the Israeli state thought through the terror this would undoubtedly cause amongst civilians in Lebanon in an attempt to make them think that they must turn on Hezbollah in order to achieve the political end.
But they haven't got at any ordinary Lebanese civilians, have they? Just Hezbollah.
Of rolling back the tide against Hezbollah. Now, this also further degrades international law. We are seeing...
He doesn't know a thing about international law, or rather, he probably does, but he chooses to pretend he does. He's got this... He chooses to pretend that there is a breach of international law here. I don't think... First of all, there isn't an international law on blowing up pages. That hasn't been dealt with yet. But secondly, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. And defending yourself against terrorists is not against international law.
Being the constant mainstreaming of serious war crimes by Israel, supporting...
No, you know, people of his ilk keep talking about war crimes in Israel. It's like they keep on saying this because they're hoping to associate Israel with war crimes. No. He's just using associative language. He can't possibly believe this.
Made possible by the West, which will collapse the already disintegrating international order. Human rights abusing death.
The international order is being threatened by groups like Hezbollah and the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and Hamas. Do you see a pattern in all of that? Because I do.
Spots and organisations will all take note of this precedent now it has been granted the de facto legitimacy of the West. We're also staring through the portal of a dystopian future where technology can be harnessed so that anyone can be instantly located and targeted and killed.
Yeah. And, you know, if that's what Jones were talking about, I'd be with him. As a matter of fact, a year ago or more, I made a video about self-driving cars. And I pointed out that self-driving cars are not actually self-driving, that they are being driven by a computer program somewhere, and that if some organisation, including your own government, if some organisation of ill will chose to drive your car into a bridgehead or something like that, then that would be something they might do. If they were that way inclined, if they were tyrants. So, yes, I have discussed this, but this is not the same thing. First of all, the Israelis were using a weapon that was being used by Hezbollah. That is, those pages were a weapon. They organised their terrorist activities, and Israel used that against them. And I don't see anything wrong with that. The idea of my smartphone spying on me, I mean, we all know they spy on you anyway, but and then possibly harming me if I incurred the wrath of a tyrannical government, that's something else. And it's something I have already spoken about. So, and it's something any thinking person has thought about. So Jones isn't coming up with anything new here. However, if that were what he was talking about, I would be with him on that. The fact that he's conflating it with what Israel did in self-defense is just dishonest, muddies the water, and makes a proper discussion of this situation that he's touched upon, makes that impossible. So he's doing enormous harm with this evil mixing of different situations. What a nasty little man he is.
I fear this is where we are heading, and you can see how an inescapable totalitarian world could be built.
Yeah. Again, so he's gone from talking about what Israel did in legitimate self-defense to another completely different situation in which our smartphones could be used against us. And that is something else altogether. And it's something we can discuss. It's something that needs to be discussed. But he's not discussing it. He's just brought in our fears about runaway technology to bolster his argument that Israel has committed a war crime when it's done no such thing.
That way one day, where anyone who resists those forces with technology that...
You see, he has this ability, and I've noticed it throughout this whole video, of constructing a universe and then arguing from this constructed universe. It's very odd.
Just takes out anyone they deem an opponent like that. I mean, where's that technology going to be in 20, 30 years? Think it through. In any case, this is a terrorist attack. It is a terrorist attack.
It is not a terrorist attack. It's an attack of self-defence targeted against terrorists. And the Israelis did a bloody good job there.
A deeply disturbing terrorist attack with hideous consequences.
No, the only thing that I find disturbing is your mentality, Owen Jones.
And we can see that Israel is attempting to stoke potentially a regional war.
No, Israel is defending itself from Hezbollah's attempts to stoke a regional war when some other country keeps shelling your cities, your towns, your villages, your schools, your playgrounds. That is an attempt to stoke a regional war. They're trying to do that to get Israel to respond. And Israel did respond. Not quite in the way they thought they would, though.
With catastrophic consequences, and we're already seeing a catastrophe.
Well, it's been catastrophic for Hezbollah, hasn't it?
As is. As ever, the message is sent out to the world. Arab life doesn't matter. Well, a bitter harvest is being sown, and we will reap it for generations to come. Please like and subscribe.
But please like. Please like. You repellent little worm. I wouldn't push like if you had my hand on an iron.
Do leave your thoughts, do your comments as ever, and help keep the show on the radio at patreon.com.
My comments would not be printable.
/784. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.
What a disgusting little man. All right, well, yeah, that's my take on Owen Jones. I'm sure that after I've stopped this recording, I will, later on I'll think of all the things I could have said and forgot to say. But I think probably I've probably covered most of the ground. At least I hope so. Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.